Normally, the idea of discussing the horror surrounding From Software games is an often bleak yet underemphasized area, overshadowed completely by the more animated and formulaic elements of fantasy, medieval or Celtic mythology present in the Dark Souls trilogy, Elden Ring or Sekiro. In the case of Bloodborne, the creative direction and subsequent shift in dynamics was way more implicative than its preceding games, and we are far enough removed from its original release to notice that no other game has been able to capture the overwhelming detail, immersiveness or horror that Bloodborne achieved a decade after.
Beasts all over the shop. You'll be one of them, sooner or later.
Unfortunately, the style of Dark Souls and Elden Ring don't allow for horror in the traditional sense, merely because those games are too imaginative. They're not grounded enough to humanize the game or convey any sort of relatability. They aren't as visceral as Bloodborne is. Not that any of this was ever an intention, of course, but it's an observation worth making. Personally, Bloodborne's genius implementation of Victorian imagery and Gothic style fantasy really pushed this game into another stratosphere compared to the rest of the series for me, and it's no wonder why this is widely considered to be one of the best games ever made. It's an absolute masterpiece and my personal favourite in regards to both design and gameplay. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the Upper Cathedral Ward and why it's the scariest area in Bloodborne and by extension the Souls series as a whole. There are a lot of areas worthy of in-depth praise and evaluation present in Bloodborne however, and I'll be using them as examples throughout as well as giving my brief opinions on them now. All of the areas are extremely well designed and contrasted perfectly with optional and secret areas. Cathedral in particular is my favourite and is ripe with unique environments, enemy encounters and staggering perspectives. The secret visit to Yargul also scared me as a kid, the music being to date the most horrifying song I've ever heard in any horror or non-horror game. The method to arriving here is also really cool and sets the tone amazingly well. The fishing hamlet has elements reminiscent of Lovecraftian horror, as everyone loves to talk about, hosting a completely original colour palette compared to the rest of the game, using misty and clear colours to give a sense of miasmic distortion, yet the clarity is very pleasant and soothing. No other area really encapsulates you the way the fishing hamlet does. It really just makes you want to go to the beach during a fog. I always love navigating this area every time I reach it at the end of the DLC, but as beautiful, scary and detailed as some areas are, the Upper Cathedral Ward still captures the most literal forms of dread and suspense in a Souls area, using techniques only seen in horror games such as Resident Evil or Outlast. Bloodborne's use of isolation combined with seemingly interconnected level design allow for its optional areas to stand out more thoroughly as menacing or unwelcoming. This is especially true with the more cryptic areas such as Cainar's Castle, the optional visit to Yargul and the Upper Cathedral Ward. The difficulty of these areas themselves, as well as the tedious methods required for reaching them, is what makes these areas as admired and noteworthy as they are. Each instance would suddenly become less rewarding, less impactful and much less intimidating or climactic if, say, you could just cross the bridge to Cainhurst as soon as you arrive in Hemwick, or if you could just walk straight into Yargul through the back exit in Old Yarnum without dying to the snatchers who drag you there. The game is abundant in symbolic, expressive and explicit details that are given to the player to help them discover more about Yarnum if required, favouring educated exploration.
Pale blood, you say? Never heard of it. But if it's blood you're interested in, you should try the Healing Church. The church controls all knowledge on blood ministration and all varieties of blood. Across the valley to the east of Yarnum lies the town of the Healing Church, known as the Cathedral Ward. And deep within Cathedral Ward is the old Grand Cathedral, the birthplace of the Healing Church's special blood. Or so they say.
To reach Old Yarnum, for example, you're initially discouraged from going anywhere near it at the start of the game, but if ignorant to this, it's hidden behind a secret stairwell in an already optional location in the Cathedral ward, the main entrance being plastered with a notice telling you to turn back, but after all of this, if you decide to head in anyway, you'll be warned one last time to turn away before you're inevitably killed.
You there! Hunter! Didn't you see the warning?
It's the gameplay equivalent of stepping inside of North Korea. In this case, you're lured into an area with reverse psychology, which is a first in the Soul series to the best of my knowledge, and I love the attention and detail that went into making these areas seem dangerous and forbidden. In other cases, the areas are instead decayed and without any resemblance of life, achieving the same effect but making you feel hopeless and misplaced rather than alarmed and overwhelmed, both being explored respectively in Dark Souls 3 with the Archdragon Peak and the Untended Graves, giving its most abnormal and scary area the veil of a hidden wall to deflect the player in the opposite direction. I'm not going to state the method required for reaching the Upper Cathedral ward, but those who have played Bloodborne before will know just how ridiculously hidden and locked away this area is. But it's the way that this area is presented that makes it seem horrific before you've even had the chance to explore it yourself. It's discreetly hidden at the top of the tower adjacent to the Odin Chapel, as if not seen the light of day for hundreds of years, playing into the unwelcoming vibe that surrounds Bloodborne as a whole, and preparing the player potentially hours before you step inside. The area starts off rather undiscerning. You're greeted with a unique enemy type that's very otherworldly and creepy, the first one gazing into the moon completely distracted by your entrance. The bridge crossing lets you observe the surrounding landscape and is one of the most beautiful smaller sections in the game. The sound of the clock tower, the wind and the illuminated lights all contrasting amazingly well. I wish there wasn't any enemies here, but they're easy enough to not really negate the atmosphere. It's not until you reach the main building where there's a massive shift in the tone compared to the rest of the game. The silence is immediately shunned in favour of a hellish drone, and it's at this point where the atrocities of the Healing Church are as apparent as ever, and that these disgusting creatures are the results of failed experiments committed by the choir, who subsequently sealed the healing workshop and the Upper Cathedral ward in an attempt to cover it up. As you explore further into the interior, your suspicions will be proven correct, as the area is extremely dark and decomposed, infested by werewolves who make a grand appearance with environmental hazards like it's Resident Evil. Even though Bloodborne is predominantly an atmospheric horror game, as opposed to a traditional horror game, the use of jump scares and anticipation when traversing these bland and dark rooms is only seen in this one area, and it caught me off guard when playing it for the first time. When compared to the fishing hamlet or Canehurst, this feels like an entirely different game. Although the area is very small in length, it's dense enough to elicit all of these elements of horror through just a few rooms because of how detailed and orchestrated it all is. Referencing the first enemy we encountered back at the entrance, it hints towards the make contact gesture located in the top floor balcony. Using this on the Eye of Memphis, we're going to play the level 3 Moon Rune. Extremely arduous to figure out, but it's these intelligently designed factors that make this game a masterpiece in my opinion. The area ends off not in a dark hallway with a brainsucker or werewolf, but in the Lumenflower Garden, which you can actually come back to in the DLC. Another visually stimulating small area that I have to give credit to, and a very pleasant end for most players until you break the window and realise that there's more. This section is what makes this whole area stand out in my opinion, letting you view over Vicky Amelia's boss arena from the upper floor, before taking an elevator down to one of the best boss fights in the game. The first fight with the Celestial Emissary is criminally underrated from an immersive and creative standpoint. Although the boss lacks the difficulty that would normally be expected from a late game fight, the atmosphere presented here is very otherworldly, and this is elevated further with the music, which is one of my favourites in the game. Combined with the arena, there's not much other fights in the Souls series that are as mesmeric as this one is without coming across as overly dramatic. Gank fights aren't usually well received in any of these games, but the gimmick here is better executed than any other iteration prior to it. Just like the Royal Rat Vanguard from Dark Souls 2, the GOAT, You have to pick out the most docile or discerning enemy from the rest, so you can use spatial awareness to herd the enemies away to avoid being overwhelmed. The fight with Arbuitus is one of the high points in the entire series in my opinion, taking place directly under the Grand Cathedral where you fight Vicar Amelia near the start of the game. It's a better example of an over-the-top, cosmic or Lovecraftian monster. The light shining from above illuminates the water and simultaneously provides natural lighting, which is very relaxing. More attentive people will also notice that Arbuitus is praying over Worm's body, who is a boss we've previously killed and is needed for progressing to this point in the game. The sound effects are perfectly cued and coordinate well with the tone of the music. The high-pitched noises are seraphic and piercing. They even do damage in stage 2 of the fight. Combining with the more aquatic, environmental sounds is a direct nod to multiple H.P. Lovecraft works, including The Shadow over Innsmouth and The Call of Cthulhu. I know this is very common knowledge by this point, but this was only popularised during the DLC and the Fishing Hamlet, even though Arbuitus was a more pure example of it in the base game. Overall, I think Bloodborne is the best game in the series and is still worth playing in 2024 if you're lucky enough to have a PS4, because somehow there hasn't been a remaster yet. A lot of people don't remember or don't care that prior to Demon's Souls, FromSoft has made horror games in the past, and I'd love to see them expand on this genre more in future titles, including a potential sequel to Bloodborne. It's a shame to see that this genre is generally neglected in today's market, favouring open world games instead. But the fact that Bloodborne is widely considered to be the best game in the series and often the best game of all time speaks volumes to this genre's potential in the future.